Dr. Dane Donahue here. Welcome back to the 8 Weeks to Wellness Challenge. We're in the Thinking Well portion of the challenge. We're going to talk about something really important that I think gets a lot of press but is not well understood, and that's the concept of stress. So Dr. Eric, everybody has stress, and yet, it seems like a lot of people these days are trying to manage their stress or avoid stress. And I think, in today's world, stress is unavoidable. Often when I lecture, I ask people to raise your hand if you have stress. And almost every hand goes up, and I always say the ones that don't raise their hand, they're too tired to raise their hand, or they would have. So we all have stress, so an important concept in the Thinking Well Challenge is how do we manage stress? So talk about stress, because we talk about good stress and bad stress. So before we go into bad stress and how we manage that and what it does to our physiology, talk about the difference between good stress and bad stress.
Okay, so stress is what we call good stress or normal stress. Stress is part of everyday life. If we didn't have it, we'd be sitting on a couch right now eating bonbons, not doing anything with our lives. So we all need that little bit of stress that gets us off the couch, gets us back into life, whether it's into school, onto a job, placement or recruitment, getting out there, kind of engaging in life. But that stress sometimes turns into distress is when we start to make that little bit of a switch, and now we think perception is bad for us.
Sure.
And that's where most of us think of stress as being bad for us.
Right, and we have something that's wired into our nervous system called a sympathetic nervous system. And everybody maybe remembers back to biology classes the term of fight or flight, is that when we get into a distress situation, let's say that you walk out of your job today and there's a Doberman Pinscher that's waiting for you by your car that looks kind of hungry. That may be a distressful thing, and so you're immediately going to go, your sympathetic nervous system is going to turn on, and you're going to kick into an increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate. Blood's going to start flowing to your muscles. You're going to start releasing adrenal hormones to get your energy up. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It may just save your life.
Sure.
The other thing that you need to understand about stress is that prolonged stress is really what is killing us, and that's what we want to talk about. So there's a gentleman by the name of Hans Selye, and they call him the father of stress, because he really studied the physiological impact of stress. And what Hans Selye found out is that there's a process that we go through, and the process is that we go through an alarm first, right? And if that alarm is not turned off, in other words, we go through that stress, we either run away from the Doberman or we don't, right? But then the stress goes away. But let's say that stress is not a Doberman that's going to go away. Let's say it's your job, or let's say it's your marriage, or let's say it's dealing with your children, and that's a Doberman that you're dealing with every single day. The alarm then goes to something we call exhaustion. And exhaustion is where you're constantly turning that sympathetic nervous system on, that alarm system on, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy to run your sympathetic nervous system, and that's why so many people have a chronic fatigue syndrome, especially in the afternoon after dealing with stress all day long. So understand that concept of what we call the general adaptive process. So the general adaptive process is how can we get our body and our nervous system more physiologically prepared to deal with stress. So thinking about stress, there's the alarm. And I want people to think about what are the alarms in your life. So for example, Dr. Eric, what are some alarms or some stressful things that you can think about?
Getting a bill in the mail.
Right.
That fires it off pretty
stress.
quick. Financial stress. Could be a phone call from a relative you just don't want to talk to sometimes.
Sure.
People stress.
Having people in your life
stress.
that you don't want to, and unfortunately sometimes it's your family.
Yeah, sometimes, they sort of that thinking thing,
Yeah, time, I think time these days is a huge stress for people. As everybody always tells me that they wish they had 28 hours, only that there's only going to be 24 hours in a day, and we're not going to increase that. So being able to manage your time is a stress for a lot of people. But those alarm, if they don't get taken care of, they go to exhaustion, and eventually exhaustion is what causes disease in the body. So working backwards, we want to think about having the adaptation in our nervous system to be able to deal with stress. So real briefly, Dr. Eric, talk about some of the things that you do in your life and some of the things that we advocate in this program that's going to build up your ability to adapt. In other words, if we always say that when somebody's on edge, it doesn't take a lot of additional stress to push them over the edge. But the concept of being centered means that you're in the center, and when you're in the center, you can handle some alarm, some stress. It may push you to the periphery, to the edge, but then you have something in your life to push you back to center. So what are the things that you do in your life that get you centered?
Sure. One's meditation. The ability to slow myself down, to look at my thoughts, We'll be expanding on that concept greatly in one of our weeks. Another thing too is our hour of power. We talked about it in the past week.
Sure.
We just look at that 1 hour to kind of put everything in line. I'm kind of a techie kind of guy, so I use Google Docs and actually create a document that has all my stressors listed out there, and I actually look them over every single morning to make sure they're taken care of. And that's the big word there, taken care of.
Right.
And first I have the ability to respond to it, take care of it. I start to realize that my stress goes down quite a bit.
And so some other things that you may do, I know going for a walk with my wife is a huge thing that I do to get me back to center, having a great relationship with her. Exercising on a regular basis helps to really build my adaptation response to stress. Again, being grateful for my children and spending time with them. So you may have things that get you back to center, but my point is, how often are you doing those things? Stress will find you. There's no doubt that stress will find you. So you've got to have these things built in that are scheduled. And what I mean scheduled is I use Google Docs as well, but I also use my Google Calendar, and I literally schedule every single week time with my wife, time to exercise, time to do yoga. Yoga is a great way to deal with stress as well because it gets the body and mind both flexible. So build those things that are going to get you centered into your week this week. Really take a look and say, what are 1 or 2 things that I can go onto my iPhone right now, go into my Google Calendar and schedule this week that's going to make me truly grateful, truly centered, and bring you back to a peace of mind that's going to turn off your sympathetic nervous system, turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system that heals you, that's active when you're sleeping at night. That's why it's so important to get rest at night. We didn't even touch on that. But a proper night's sleep is a great way to get centered because it turns on the part of our nervous system is when we heal, when we kind of shut our body down a little bit. So I don't know if you want to wrap up with anything, Dr. Eric. I think we covered a lot in this module.
Yeah, but this will be a high resource page. On your right-hand side, you'll see your resources area. We'll have a lot of these concepts listed for you, some resources, whether it's walking through a Google Doc, because we brought up some terms here today that we want to expand upon a little bit. But you did a great job.
Yeah, so don't forget, fall into the gap. And what I mean by gap is the general adaptive process. Get your body adapting to stress better. It's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen by conscious choice and scheduling out time to do these things we talked about in this module. So we'll see you next week.